The question is whether we got to this bad point in which intervention, even if it is for humanitarian reasons, and I believe in the responsibility to protect concept, the question is whether diplomacy was given really a good chance. And my conclusion is no. I mean, look what happened with Kofi Annan's work there, and what he withdrew from that responsibility. And my reading is simply that he felt that the main actors were not really interested in getting a good diplomatic solution. And I think that's pretty bad, because it's going to be very ugly, right? And I think some of the parts that look to be stubborn, well, should be also, I'm not talking about the Syrians, I'm not talking about President Assad, but even the Russians said, okay, what do we do? Well, we get rid of Assad, just tell me what comes next. Huh? And how is it going to work? And I think if you don't answer those questions, it's very tough to move forward. I think the solution has to include everybody. And this was a problem when somebody said, okay, Assad will be at least in a transition. But then 5 minutes later, somebody said, Assad cannot be there. Well, the whole thing fell apart, and Kofi Annan left. I don't know whether Brahimi will be more successful, but I don't see any progress. So I'm afraid, for me, it's right. We're moving rather fast to something which will be ugly, and when it happens, it will be even uglier.
One more hotspot, and then we'll move to another topic, like Egypt. I mean, are we going to end up in Egypt with an Iran-style theocracy, or democracy, or will military come in?
Well, again, it's very difficult to predict. I think the interesting thing about Egypt is that those sort of what I would call liberal forces are actually, starting to organize themselves. And as you saw when the president has been trying to assume certain powers, there's been a pushback that's been very strong. The other thing, though, that is really important in this region is to understand the demography of it. One of the things that, actually, it's kind of embarrassing to say that, I don't know if this is true of you as well, but I find in the 5 years I've left office, I've learned so much. And it's a bit embarrassing, really, because you think, it would be good if I'd known all that when I was doing the job. But I actually remember when I was in my, because politics is very odd. I mean, my party had been in opposition for 18 years before I came to power, so the only job I ever had in government was Prime Minister. And
that's not a bad job.
No, it's not a bad job, but on the other hand, I wasn't complaining, I was just worried about the people, really. I remember after about a year in office where I was struggling with various issues, and I said to my guys, I think I'd like to go out and just explain to people, this is my first job in government, I've been learning for the last year. They said, you can't say that. Come out and tell the people you're learning on the job as being Prime Minister. The country in panic. So, anyway, we didn't do that. But, so one of the things that I think is really important is to understand how some facts and features that you don't think about, they don't enter the political debate a lot, but in fact are really, really important. And one of the things to understand about the region of the Middle East is its demography. Half the population of Gaza is under the age of 18, half of them. Egypt was a country of 30 million people half a century ago. It's 90 million today. What this means is you've got an explosion of youth who, by the way, aren't just worried about democracy. Most of all, they're worried about economic opportunity. So the other thing we're going to have to do in this region is help them, not just with a process of democratic evolution. They need to make the right economic decisions. Now here's something that's very interesting. Ernesto was the person who really started Mexico on its path of economic reform, which is why its economy has come as far as it has today. One of the problems that you've got is that economic reform in these countries became associated with the old regimes and became discredited as a result of it. And so what's happening in Egypt, for example, is very often a problem arises, people come out on the street, they throw a lot more money at it. It's not actually the answer, but it seems as if that's... And so one of the things, you say what will happen with Egypt, of fundamental importance is to understand that unless they take the right economic decisions, and again I think we've got to help them, there is no way that the democracy in the end will take root properly.
By the way, just for those in the audience, I've been trying to, I haven't asked specific questions from the audience, but all these Middle Eastern themes came up in your questions. But here's one that came up. It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but it responds to what you just said about being prime minister. One member of our audience is asking, if you had a choice, would you rather be a president or a prime minister?
It's all about choice, though, isn't it?
Well, I think it's really a question about which system is.
Depends on the country.
Depends on the country.
That's definitely true.
There are some countries that have both. I took it to mean, a presidential.
No, but it's a very serious and profound question. We have been debating that in Latin America. Like my country really adopted the U.S. model, presidential regime. And since we really came to full democracy some years ago, a lot of people are saying, seriously, maybe we should go to a different system which could be more parliamentarian and less presidential. I don't really have an answer, a definite answer, because there are pros and cons. I think it's a very legitimate question, even for countries that have a very long tradition of presidential systems.
And you have one term in Mexico, isn't it?
Yes, 6 term, no re-election ever, and that's why I got this great job. I've been so happy.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that there are advantages and disadvantages either way. I mean, I think the advantage of well, obviously in the UK, we don't have a president because we've got the Queen, so just want to make that clear in case there's any burgeoning Republican sentiment in the crowd here. But I actually think the real issue is this. The single most difficult thing I have found in politics is making effective change. And therefore, the thing, whether you're a president or a prime minister, the thing that I now like to sort of think about, study and talk about and interact with different presidents or prime ministers is the single toughest thing in politics today is actually getting things done. I used to think, when I first came to office, my party, the Labour Party, had always been taught that the civil service and the system was a kind of conspiracy of the right wing and so on and so forth. And after a few years, I began to wish it was a conspiracy to do anything. Because really what it was a conspiracy for inertia. And what you find is the most difficult thing today is trying to make change in circumstances where the short-term politics is often very tough, where the vested interests are very strong, pushing back against the change. And whether you're a president or a prime minister, the hardest task, and it's something that, I often say to people that the journey of being a leader is that you start at your least capable and most popular, and you end at your most capable and least popular. Right, at least that was my journey. And so, what happens is people forget that the process of governing is also itself a discipline, something that you need to learn and you need to be creative and innovative about, and it's tough.
But, your question is so serious that can be given an example to respond. If you had a parliamentarian system here right now, we wouldn't be talking about the fiscal cliff.
That's right.
Because the government was already in power and they have to decide whatever they need to decide to save the situation. And here we are, every day afraid of what will happen. And
This is true, but you have different pathology.
no, I'm not arguing in
You have a
favor.
civil service that's the resistance as opposed to a legislature.
Yeah, and also, by the way, you're in, you know, Parliament, you can have, I mean, we've got a coalition government in the UK now. Some of those decisions can be difficult to do. But, you know, there are advantages and disadvantages, I think, between the presidential and prime ministerial system. Personally, one thing I think is great about your presidential system is that you can choose people from outside Parliament to be in your cabinet, whereas in the UK system, you basically choose from within the ranks.
Or you make them yours, you put them in the cabinet. One of those, Mark Brown was and one day he said, I'm going to the British border. Then they ignored and went to the cabinet.
We're going to have
That's a good trick.
30 minutes.
It wasn't a trick. Unfortunately, it was one you couldn't play that often. But anyway,
Moving right on.
yes.